glad to be here. And again, we're following through from our last Monday when we were together. We're going to have Dr. Michelle Graves joining us again today for the second meeting. We want to really continue to explore the topic that she was discussing. And as I said, with regard to my book, By Any Other Name Is Still Sex, she and I started having this conversation earlier last year with regard to how much sexuality was really involved in a lot of our formative thinking and the way we, as African American culture, the way we do things today. A lot of it was because of many inappropriate sexual traumatic things that were done to us. The way when we came over on the ships, the way we were treated. She talked a great deal last Monday about that whole methylation process. So we're going to visit a little more of that and get into some other interesting topics that she has since discovered, since we've decided to start talking about and discussing this whole thing about slavery and the African American culture. And we find ourselves here today, but we didn't get here by accident. This is a process that's been going on for hundreds of years. And like anything, the God of all creation, who says, old things pass away, behold, all things become new, he is able to transform us. So let's get into our lesson today. We're glad to have, again, Dr. Michelle Graves here, and we are looking forward. Dr. Graves, what do you have today for us?
Wow. Thank you for that fantastic and phenomenal introduction. Apostle, I appreciate your sensitivity to such a subject matter that is genuinely not known. We don't even like to talk about slavery because it makes us feel a certain kind of way. And then we go through all the naysayers who don't want to believe it happened and all of the things about it. But let me say that last week, we laid a foundation in terms of it being a biologic. And when I say that, this is not about a feeling, it's not about culture, it's not about society. This is about what is happening inside of your brain.
All right.
And this is major. This is so major because the brain controls everything in the human body. It has nerve attachments to every organ from your toenail all the way up to your hair follicles. It's there. And so if we don't understand that, we will be dismissive because of ignorance. I tell people it's simply ignorance that you don't understand what is occurring. And this is how that works, So last week we laid the basis so that you would know that this is not about my personal feelings. I bumped into this as a part of my research on the economics of slavery. And in talking, as I shared with my lab partner, who is a biologist, I'm a biochemist as well as a finance person, but when we began to look at the behavior of African descent Americans who descend from the diaspora, which is very specific, okay? Slavery scattered African descent people all over South America, the Caribbean. But what happened in the United States of America was so heinous and so bizarre and so horrific that further study needed to be done because the behaviors then are still in operation today. And there is no explanation that makes sense other than looking at chemical alterations in the brain that took place to provide our people with some measure of coping and survival skills. So, and that is very, very important because it has been our ability to survive, crazy or not, but it has been our ability to survive that has enabled us to be where we are today, which is a people that are extremely resilient and have the ability to deal with situations in a good way, even if it doesn't necessarily feel good at the time. We do not often self-destruct. Yep.
I want to pause right here, and I don't want to forget this. It's just 1:05. We're just getting started. I want the listening audience that is tuning in to know we'll be here until 2 o'clock. And we're hoping our director, Mr. James, if he can allow for questions to be sent in. If anybody has questions, Dr. Graves is going to be more than glad to answer or address some of your questions, some of your commentary, if you have them. And if you have questions that we may not have an answer to today, we'll probably be back again next Monday. So don't fret. We'll try to address whatever comes through, but we want to do that. And I also want to ask Mr. James to make sure he puts Michelle Graves' Cash App link up there so people will know if they'd like to. It would be nice if some people would like to seed into this knowledge that they're getting. Okay, continue on, Michelle.
Okay, I thank you so much. And I wanted to thank you for your kind donation, and another lady sent a donation as well. I do believe strongly in blessing other people, not for some wacko religion, but just as a thank you.
Well,
because
we're grateful.
Yeah, the level of work and the amount of time that has been expended to connect all the pieces for our people. I'm not talking about white people. I'm not talking about Jews. I'm talking Europeans. I'm talking about our people that came over here on slave ships from West Africa. Very specific, came here. Didn't come to Cuba or the islands or South America. They came here and stepped into something that is worse than a horror story, period, through no fault of our own. Because when we were sold or traded, our tribal elders at that time did not know of this unique and perverse institution. There was a tremendous love of children, of family, of tribal continuity. And you'd have to go over there to see for yourself to know what I'm talking about, to Ghana, Benin, and Senegal. They love their families. They do.
Yes.
They love their families. And to have a situation where you traded out people, humans, and cut their ties, severed their cord, and then sent them into this monstrosity of humankind, it's just unbearable. It is. So what I wanted to focus on is, number one, don't be slack about slavery, because as I tell most people, most dysfunctionalities in African descent men and women over here are a direct and identifiable result of the slave experience in America. No, it's not because your mama was crazy and your daddy was an alcoholic. It's because 400 years ago and continuing forward, stuff started happening, and the brain, as a part of its divinely ordained purpose, created chemicals that attached to the DNA, which means they couldn't be altered or changed. They are part of the DNA, the chromosomal characteristic of that DNA that will pass from generation to generation to generation, all the way down the line, all the way down the line. And scientists today, in a field of study called epigenetics, it's an emerging field, have validated that this is exactly what has occurred. And they didn't identify us. I did. I said, if you want a case study, you need to look at the 15 million people that are over here today and our stories. They cannot be explained logically and consistently without understanding the biologic behind it. When the brain, which is the seat of all of our faculties, eyes, ears, nose, touch, the brain, when the brain is traumatized, particularly sexual traumatization, which lends to what your book talks about. It's about sex. It's about what happens to a human who is illegally joined to another human for the sole purpose of pleasuring that other person. We know that in the scriptures, Tamar was raped by her brother.
Yes.
And we know what happened.
Right.
Why would that account be in the Bible? Out of all the things you could talk about, why was that particular account of incest, rejection, and destruction put in there? Because he was telling you it's about sex. And when a human being joins to another human being, especially without consent and by trauma,
yes,
it creates in the brain a discombobulation that forces the brain to develop these methyls. And the purpose of the methyls is to keep you from doing what you should do, which is kill somebody.
okay,
Do something. You know what I'm saying? Suicide, kill yourself. That's not the God purpose. God created us to be eternal beings, not to be dead by your own means, hang yourself. But we know that the thing that distinguished American slavery, known as chattel slavery, because we were subhumans, it's like walking past the desk and kicking it. And the desk doesn't respond because it's not considered human. It's not considered an animal either. It's considered beneath an animal. Now, the question that always arises is that if we were considered subhuman, why did they do this? And it gets back into economics, because a Black female known as a wench, by their calculations, if she, from her point of menses until cessation, was estimated to produce, live or dead, 45 babies. Now, I don't care who you are. That's a lot of stuff.
My God.
And it didn't matter. And incidentally, if you go to the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C., they have on the bottom floor, when they talk about slavery, it's a powerful piece. I could not do it. I tried and I couldn't do it. I had to get out. I felt I was suffocating. My methyls were acting up. I mean, for real. My methyls were going like this. I had to get out of there. But they showed where the Black wenches, how the slave master could take them to the bank as collateral. And based upon her ability to produce all these babies, what her worth was, had nothing to do with her skills. She was a baby machine. And her job was to produce babies that could be sold in the marketplace. Yes. Now, you and I both know that cows and ducks and everybody else, when they have their babies, they are attached. It's a part of the soul. Yes. And so you can well imagine that these young girls as young as 7 began birthing life, and it didn't matter where the sperm came from, as long as it was a human, and or it could have been a male slave, because many male slaves had hundreds of babies, because their role was to reproduce into her life that could be sold. Now,
Yes.
what happens to a woman who is repeatedly raped and abused and grows into a system where that is accepted? Her babies, in fact, were to be suckled by Big Mama, because she had to go out and pick cotton and do other things. So you've got an entire infrastructure around sex with no accountability or responsibility, just produce. And psychologically, it damaged the women, definitely. The methyls did exactly what they were supposed to do, which is when she was penetrated, she felt nothing. She didn't care. It didn't matter. That was methylation, to keep her from attaching to the act. And it was something that just felt good and done. On to the next thing. It also created, in its very scope, anger, her bitterness, which she could not express without punishment, because there's no way that the overseer of the plantation was going to tolerate acting out. And she would be lashed, and she would be whipped and abused again. Okay, so you had horrible punishment to reinforce horrific behavior. So her response was to internalize the sorrow and the pain, to develop a stiff upper lip, but on the inside, she was a very sick person. And the reality was, as she continued to birth these babies, and there are all kinds of accounts. There's a book called To Be a Slave. It's an old book. These are old books from my library I pulled, and this book was written in 1947. And these accounts are so horrifying. Let me give you one. The women put their babies in the pig trough and headed to pick cotton. And it was a 4-mile trek. And while they were down there, a storm burst out. And the women started running to try to get their babies. By the time they got to the trough, all the babies had drowned. And according to the account that I read, the slave master took the babies and fed them to the pigs. Because if anyone knows, as a farm person, pigs eat anything. And he pitched all the babies to the pigs and told the women to get back to work. Now, or else get beaten. Okay, now you can understand, you aren't allowed to do any grieving. You aren't allowed to have any sorrow. You will be beaten if you don't get back to work, and your babies have all died. But the slave master doesn't care. It's food for the pigs, and he will send somebody to impregnate them again. Okay? They're not even human. It doesn't matter. They're just niggers. Okay? Very important psychologically. She developed such a sense of distrust, hatred, and mental illness, which is, how do I cope with this? Now I'm gonna give you another situation. This is the truth. It was conveyed to me, I will not say who, but I made a comment to a friend of mine who's beautiful, that she looked just like a woman I saw in her home in a picture. Gorgeous. She was browner than her, but same features, gorgeous. And she went on to say that was my great-great-grandmother who was a slave. And she had a husband and, of course, a slave master. And the slave master came and took it anytime he wanted because that was his property, despite the fact that she was, quote, married. She didn't ever know what color the baby was going to come out. So as we move forward, you got two lines of a family. Oh, by the way, the slave master, when the husband commented about how, men don't like that type of thing, commented, and guess what the slave master did to him? Sold him down to Mississippi. But she didn't ever have a husband no more.
Okay.
And so she had dark children and light children. And that contends today. Okay.
I want to just make a comment because what you're sharing has just brought up a couple of thoughts to me. One, I posted on my Facebook page this past week, and some people that are listening may have seen the article themselves because it was in the Facebook feed over, I think, about a week and a half ago. But there is currently legislation right now, 2021, that is being considered. I'm not sure if the decision has already been made, if they've ruled on it, but legislation is on the table to say that they do not want the public schools teaching about slavery, anything from 1619 forward. They don't want them to teach it. And they said that schools that will teach it, there will be some kind of economic punishment or some kind of unjust, I think, things are going to be done as far as that particular school, or I don't know if it would be that school system, that particular city where the school is. I'm not sure. And I'm a little fuzzy. I don't want to misquote the article, but I know it had to do with they absolutely do not want the history of slavery taught. The second thing I want to say, Dr. Michelle, before I get back to you, is when you were talking about the fact that the babies died, they drowned, and then they just went on and fed them to the pigs, and then they'll just have sex with her again. And they're not concerned about her feelings or her thoughts. I think I remember reading or seeing, matter of fact, I think I learned that from you. I think you were formally saying that there was a lot of red tape and legislation, paperwork, documentation that had to be put in place before the first slave ship left West Africa, because the slave ship was insured by New York Life.
Absolutely.
And that they did not list us as humans, they listed us as commodities.
Right.
And to this day, that, I believe you said, that information is still written, or it's available for you to know. But that's another reason why they still go back and forth between, are we human, are we animals, or are we just a commodity, we're a thing. And I think you were saying because we're a commodity, that's the reason they feel they can treat us any kind of way, because we're just a thing that they own.
We're just a thing.
So I wanted to just throw those two things in.
We're just a thing with a vagina.
Yeah.
That's able to produce life that has value in the market. That's what we are. And our men were reduced to, in the same way, a plantation only needed 2 good bucks, Black men, to impregnate all those women. And those that really weren't endowed like that, they reduced them to butlers and minor things. And those that were young boys that didn't seem like they were going to have much going on in their male area, they were auctioned off to New Orleans to become male concubines. So again, the whole disruption within our people, the horror And again, do Black men have methods? But of course, why wouldn't he? I mean, God ordained men to be protectors and
Yes.
providers. He
Yes.
did. And at the point you can't protect or provide, then there you go. You're out of order, and your only value is sleeping with many women, impregnating many women, but having no commitment, because how could you have a commitment when you are not anything but a commodity? How
Now,
can you?
in your studies, did you find that it was a true occurrence, which I've read before, that some of the sons, as you said, the male bucks,
Bucks.
is one thing that they could actually, it's one thing for them to actually sire all these children with all these different women, but sometimes they were forced to do this with their sisters and their mothers.
Absolutely.
Is that,
Anybody, it didn't matter. It didn't matter.
it didn't matter about
No,
relation? Okay.
no, it didn't matter. And believe me, the Bucks were a busy little group, including Miss Ann. Okay,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother dynamic, because her husband had problems and business, and she saw what was going on, and she wanted some too. And when she got pregnant, many a baby was killed at birth. Many a plantation is full of unmarked graves from mixed babies that were destroyed and killed. And of course, that's a scary place to be, because a buck discovered they didn't kill him. He was heading to Mississippi. Auction block, out of here. You wasn't gonna do that. I'm
You know,
getting
I
rich.
think, yes. And I think the reality of that, well, number one, we know according to scripture, as you said, Tamar and what happened with her brother,
Yes.
it should never, never, never have happened. And God put that in there so that we would know this is a no-no. But we know that God clearly has defined that as incest.
Yes.
And so then when you say that this was a normal routine thing in the slave camps on the plantations, and so none of us really know if some of those children actually turned out to be mentally, some kind of physically or mental retardation. But that's the term in the streets when people are using profanity and they call someone MF.
Oh,
it's
no,
where
that's
it came
exactly
from.
what that is.
And that is so horrible. I mean,
yes.
all the years when I was younger and I would hear people say that, I never gave it. I knew it was like a bad word. I never wanted to say that word. But then when I actually found out the defining of that word was because of the act that had occurred over and over on the plantations, that broke my heart. Dr.
And
Michelle,
it broke their heart too.
Oh my gosh. And that we use it so cavalierly in the streets. We as a people should not ever, capital EVER, say that ever again. Just by virtue of where we know that came from. That's so horrible.
Right. And even the issue of, as I tell people often, even the issue of male homosexuality as not being West African tradition, but a white European expression, because we know historically, going back to Hippocrates and other Greek men, that men did this to each other. Yes. But we did not. Our culture never accepted or tolerated it. So you have this same thing coming into the United States, where they do this to the boys, and those who are particularly not so well endowed get sold off to New Orleans. And you know about New Orleans. I mean, I didn't write the book. The French took that and ran with it. Okay.
Yes.
But my point in saying this relative to the methyls is that the brain had to do this to cope. It was a coping mechanism. Now, and these things would pass generationally. So her daughter would carry the same methyls that her mother had. And this is why we have today, because there's no way you can remove a methyl from DNA. It's God set it up for the good, not for the bad. It was never meant to be like that. But because the adversary, and I say this bluntly, the adversary is brilliant. You know, we disdain science. I tell folks, don't you ever disdain science, because God is the great scientist.
Yes, yes.
The great scientist. And
Yes.
he does everything with precision, with a specified outcome. But when you get into this flesh and perversion and twisted stuff, where instead of methyls being expressed to excellence, I mean, to do great things, you got methyls that are programmed to keep you in a sane question mark mode. And that is where I look at so much today, and I truly, truly hurt, because I really do understand. I have read so much literature over the years. The Schomburg Library in New York City was, other than the Library of Congress, those were the only two places you could get the collections of the slaves that they wrote. You know, the Quakers transcribed this stuff, and it's all in these stack areas, and a security guard watches you while you're reading this stuff. It is so painful. It is so painful. And the whip and the lash. And then they say, well, why do Black women today put up with stuff for their men? And I said, well, that, when do you want to start? How far do you want to go back? Okay. Why did she have to be? My own grandmother, great grandmother in Kentucky, her mother was a slave. My great grandmother, I used to hate to spend the night with her, because she had these things on her back that felt like snakes. And, you know, you all in that bed together, and she would rub against me. She's just a tiny woman, like 4'8", but those things felt alive. And I just hated going to bed with her. And she was such an honorable woman, but these things were so horrible. And she finally told me later, I said, oh my God, Grandma, I said, what is that? And she said, Massa was trying to do it to my mother, and I ran to protect my mother, and he beat me too. And that's what that is. And you can imagine, as a teenager at that time, I was like, what? Because we didn't talk about slavery back then.
No, no.
They called it a miserable time, but we didn't really know. They didn't talk about Africa. They didn't talk about any of this stuff. But I'll never forget, her back had raised keloids and looked like snakes. And they moved because, you know, that's your skin. And I just said, this is the most horrible thing. But it helped me moving forward to understand a number of what we would call dysfunctional behaviors within our people that trace right back to the horror. And I mean, your sons are going to sleep with you now because master's low on, you know, bucks. Okay. You going to fight your sister because neither one of you have anything. You're both wigged out and depressed. And of course, stress is another whole thing. You're not eating enough food. So the babies you're producing, because if you're absent folic acid, folate, B9, your babies are not going to develop strong cells. So you're birthing these children that have all kinds of conditions beyond mental. They actually have physical issues, high blood pressure, cancer, All these things were part of the slave experience because the women and the men were not allowed to eat properly. They had a corn cake and sometimes a piece of bacon. That's it. That's it. So how are you going to have good, healthy children? Slave master didn't care. The numbers say if you get enough of them in there and they all pregnant, you're going to make a fortune. And they did. They did. They made a fortune because they not only worked us, but we birthed babies and were compliant and subservient. I'm going to read this to you real quick. It's from the book is called The Myth of the Negro Past. It's by a gentleman called, a historian called Mr. Melvin Herkovitz, who is not a Black man, but this is what he said. And this is so deep. This is 1947. But he says here, it can hardly be maintained that savage life is idyllic. Yet the question remains, and may long remain, whether the manner in which the Negroes were brought in touch with civilization resulted in the greater blessing or the greater curse. That manner was determined in part, at least, by the nature of the typical Negroes themselves. Impulsive and inconstant, sociable and amorous, voluble, dilatory and negligent, but robust, amiable, obedient, and contented. They have been the world's premium slaves. 1947, out of print book.
Terrible, terrible.
If we don't begin to have an understanding, and I'm going to tell you this, the Master gave us Jesus to manipulate scriptures so that it could be argued that this was divine destiny for us. I will submit to you the Holy Ghost spun that thing around. Because as they began to understand that the scriptures really were alive, and as they began to have encounters themselves, they began to put their hope in eternity. They did. They began to embrace eternity, and they said it in their writings. We know white people are not in heaven. They said this. They said they're not in heaven. They can't be in heaven because we in heaven. And they talked about heaven as where they wanted to be. And based upon their lives, period, they didn't have any other choice. The children were never dressed. They were naked. Naked. They didn't have no clothes. They had no shoes. They all running around naked. The women were barely dressed, and the men as well. Horrible, horrible thing. But here we are today. And as I share with people, make sure your shout is not out of the methyl. Make sure your worship is not based on a pain recall from somebody else in your family tree. Make sure that you can worship him in the spirit of truth, because now you know the truth. And now you can be attentive to how it is trying to express on you yourself. I tell folks, number one, don't you ever speak bad about another Black person. Ever. You don't have nothing to say about another Black person's sorrow. Tend to your own.
Yeah.
What you do need to do is be extremely sensitive and empathetic to what they are experiencing, because you don't know. You don't know. Methyls make us more apt to use drugs, opiates, marijuana, and alcohol. They're to numb the pain.
Yes.
That's their job. So if you are in pain all the time, why wouldn't you use something to help with your pain? Why? That's why and for the record, they know this.
I have to say, Dr. Michelle, I know for me, I had a bias because for me, I never drank or took drugs or did anything like that. So people who did that as like routine social behavior, especially when it ended up impacting them financially, or impacting them as far as their job, their career, their livelihood, their well-being. I just used to think it was such foolishness. And until just maybe 10, 15 years ago, did I finally start to become more sensitive to the issue, because it wasn't until then, when there started to be more information coming out about slavery and how horrendous this whole thing was, that I began to realize that, as you're saying, all of these drugs and the alcohol and everything, it was just a coping mechanism because of how horrible some people's experience was. And even for you, like you said, sleeping with grandmom and actually seeing the scarring on her back, that's an image that you'll probably have all your days. And some of us were, you're here currently in 2021, but you actually experienced that. And to know that that's your grandmother who you love, but she's got this horrible story attached to what her back looks like, that's forever, embedded in your hard drive. And so some of us were just still, you're an example. And then there's others that are an example of just being too close to that situation. I think especially when I think back to friends of mine that I have met who were born and raised in the South, and their experiences are nothing, worlds away from what I went through. And I didn't really have any horrible experiences like any of that in Cincinnati. So I couldn't even relate. But I just saw a documentary last week after we did our last Monday show. I think I saw this on Tuesday or Wednesday, where there was still slavery going on in Mississippi up until 1963, 4, and 5. It was still slavery going on. And I was blown away when they showed and shared the information about the fact, Martin Luther King had already started the marches. The March on Washington had happened. Black people were protesting and fighting for freedom. And there was still this bastion of existence down in the most remote areas of Mississippi. The Black people had no idea that there was freedom outside of just hundreds and hundreds of miles of trees and farmland. They were still enslaved. I am in high school in 1965. Who could believe that it was still slave? They were still on a plantation being treated as slaves, still being beat, still being whipped. And I couldn't, but go ahead.
But again, that even after Juneteenth, it took the Union Army 2 years to deal with Texas, because Texas just straight out refused to let these people go. And then there are places in Mississippi when they were declared free that they killed them all. They killed them all. They just killed them all and dumped them in a big pot, a big gully. These accounts are not exaggerated. These are documented and validated. The thing that I concern myself with is not just about her reproductive abilities, but the fact that the brain responded to this horror by creating this expression, genetic expression known as methylation, that was now a part of her family history. For real. And that's why I share with people, I need to be paid. I said, they can't pay you enough money to satisfy the debt. They can't. They can make a start, but there's not another people in this country who has that particular expression in their brain, period. No, that's a direct result of human behavior, which is that, and I don't know, like I said, when you see what that whip looks like, and the fact that you got 25 licks as a minimum, meaning if you drink too much water, they beat you. If you didn't do this, they beat you. If your menses was longer than it should have been, they beat you. I mean, to live a life where you have no other experience or point of reference than being beaten and being sexed and eating a little bit of garbage and trying to grow your own vegetables if you can. But make no doubt about it, this was an American institution. No other group, civilization, including today, has ever treated people. And unlike in the Caribbeans, at least they got their religion, even if it's not to your taste, but they do have community. In America, they did not allow them to develop community, which is communications. They weren't allowed to read. The only person that could read the Bible was a handpicked man, and only allowed to read certain things. So they cut off our ability to communicate with one another in a positive and community reinforcing way. So what did it leave? Well, we're dealing with that with COVID now. When you by yourself, you can be with 50 people and you can't talk to each other. That's a lonely place. That's a very lonely place to be.
And, and I think what you're saying is so sobering, because I, like you, had an opportunity to go to Africa, and the way I saw the people and the families interact over there in South Africa was nothing like the propaganda that you would hear about, like, oh, Black people are just this way. You could see they were so very much into family. When I was over there, you could really see the love and the adoration they had for the parents, the grandparents, the children, grandchildren. And I think when I made the comment a second ago, Dr. Michelle, about the legislation that's currently on the table about not wanting to talk about this, that they're going to deny schools the ability to teach this history. Again, here we are in 2021, and I'm on this platform with you, you're on with me, and we're talking about this. But this is just, this isolated moment. We've got some time to talk about this, and we've got the freedom to talk about this. But you almost wonder now, the legislation that is currently being considered right now in 2021 is still the denial of this society and the powers that be from wanting to say that this actually happened. For you to say, to teach about slavery, or to demand that there is no teaching about slavery, is to say that you want to pretend it doesn't exist, it never happened. Just let's throw it over, ball it up, throw it in, put it in a trash bag, throw it out to sea. And then no wonder you have people, even among our own people, we're constantly, for lack of a better way to say it, player hating on one another, because they try to teach that this is our normal behavior. When their sorry butts drove us, beat us, made us into the animals and animalistic behavior and these creatures that they now do not like. Because as I said, I saw a difference in just that whole affect of Black people when I was in South Africa. And, I just kind of really paid attention to how they acted and interacted with one another. I was really watching and looking day and night. I was just watching them, because I was trying to see, like, if they looked anything like people I knew here in America, or acted, and I mean, there was a lot of similarities, but the warmth of relationship and family was so tangible. It was just right there. It was strong. And so now it's almost as if the powers that be created this mess, starting with the ship that came and they listed us as commodities. All of this stuff that has gone on for all of these years is still in 2021. You're still trying to take a giant eraser and erase this and pretend it didn't happen. And so that we can't even begin to talk about reparations, or like you said, there is no amount of money that can satisfy the wickedness and the destruction that's been done. But I guess what it is, I hate that we as a people have to keep going through this, trying to, you know, it's almost like people tell you, you know, if you have an issue or a challenge, you know, you should face the challenge head on and deal with it so that you can get healed from it. We never get to face this thing head on and deal with it except on platforms like this, because again, like I said, you got the powers that be saying, if this is taught in schools, the schools will be punished, the schools will be closed or whatever. They're not going to allow it. Horrible.
But let me just share this with you, and this leads into our next blog, where I'm going to talk about answers. How do we get delivered from this hell that we are in?
Yeah.
And I do not want to be viewed as a sole authority. I am just very thoroughly researched. Okay.
Okay.
Because people were not on this page a long time ago. So I've had the benefit of books and stuff and hands-on stuff, but I don't expect them, because of their own pride and denial, to ever address this in an honorable way. I don't. What I do expect to happen is, thanks to the power of technology and information such as mine and other corroborating information, and the rise of Africa, which is 6 or 7 months ago, a coalition of African tribal leaders repented to Black people.
Yes, yes.
They did. They said, this is a horrible thing. We did not know. We did not know. Ghana has an open door policy for Black people that want to come home. But as I tell folks, don't you dare come home sick. You can't come over there sick. You gotta get delivered over here before you start talking about running to Africa over there, because they got problems. It's not our problems.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to soul search within ourselves to begin to deal with this openly, with deep compassion, and to cry out to the Lord, who is our deliverer.
Yes, yes.
He's our deliverer.
Yes.
I am telling you, the once a girl has been sexually activated, she's on it. She will be on it with anybody. If she's not aware, where are these feelings coming from?
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't thinking like that. Where is this coming from? I'm telling you, we have to save ourselves. And we save ourselves with the word of God.
Yes.
We save ourselves with the understanding of how we got where we got. And we save ourselves with the confidence and the assurance that God has better for us. He's not asleep. He's not asleep. I tell Black women, if anybody got to preach on them, it better be you. Because the devil ain't gave you nothing. The devil has not given you anything ever. Everything you got, you had to struggle and work for. Everything. You couldn't count on nobody. Okay? And now, since you know it's the devil, you can handle this accordingly.
Yes.
I've got to go and plug in my battery. I am so sorry. If you could continue.
Yeah, well, we've only got a few more minutes, and I'm going to ask the director, Mr. James. I don't know if we did we get any questions in, Mr. James, at all, or no? Or commentary? I wonder if he can hear me. No, okay, no, quite, all right, good. I do want to say, and as we're closing out from our time together, Dr. Michelle made a comment with regard to the Bible and those ones that were appointed as acceptable to be preachers. They didn't have very much community, but they did start to give them insight on information about Jesus and the Bible and that kind of thing. And so even listening today, and I kind of knew this and had it in the back of my mind, but again, it just brings more feet and legs to it today. This was probably, we're gonna have to get out of here. We only got a few more minutes left, but this probably was this was hell on earth for Black people. The slavery and all of that was hell on earth. So therefore, when we all just kept talking about that great getting up morning and one day going to be with the Lord, now we know why there was so many. I will say from my parents and grandparents' generation, that was constantly their conversation. One day they would be through with this, and as they said, studied more, no more. And now you can see their obsession with eternity and going to be with the Lord, because this whole thing had to be nothing but hell to them. This was all 150% hell. So they knew there was a great day that they were looking forward to. And so now even that makes more sense in their thoughts and their notions. But anyway, this has been a good, another good, insightful meeting, Dr. Michelle, and thank you so much. Again, we're going to look forward to our next time to get together and again, I just want to say to the listening audience, if anybody's out there hearing us, that during this month of February, which we shouldn't have just this one month relegated, but anyway, that's what we got. This month of February, which is Black History Month, this is such a wonderful time to really be paying attention to anything that comes across your feed on your Facebook feed, information that you get, maybe newspapers, magazines, because for whatever reason, thank goodness, it is at this time of year more than any other time that we at least do see more stories and get more information and updates about who we are as a people. So we're for myself and Dr. Michelle, we're going to take full advantage of the fact that this time of year is what has been the focus this February of each year. So we will be back again next Monday with more on this topic. And if you have questions and you want to send them in before we meet next Monday, and send them in ahead of time, KAZ Radio TV, send it in. And I know the director, Dr. Larry James, will make sure that we have that insight and we can address any comments. But we're grateful for those that came on. And if you heard anything and you enjoyed it, please make some comments or let us know. Again, I would like you to also make, if possible, please sow a seed to Michelle. Her Cash App link is on, and that would be a wonderful thing if you could do that. And we would be very, very grateful for that. But other than that, we will see you again next week at 1 o'clock. Michelle, do you have any closing comment? We got to get out.
Just make sure you tell your children. Don't have them out here as castaways. Please, it's not the time in history. Thank you so much, Dr. Barbara, for the opportunity, and God bless you richly.
God bless you, hon. This has been wonderful. And those of you, if you've heard her and you've heard me, remember the answer and the solution to all of this is Jesus, who is Lord and Savior. He is the
Yes.
one that will deliver us, set us free. We are not looking for this institution of the United States of America to do anything to fix this. We know who is able to fix this and take care of it all. So anyway, God bless you. Have a great day.
Thank
We
you.
love